Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Detection at Scale, Season 2. Today, I'm here with Al Faiella, who is the Director of Security Engineering and Security Operations at ThoughtSpot. How's it going, sir?
It's going swell. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. We were just talking about fitness and marathons, and you said you ran New York.
I did. I crossed the finish line by every legal definition. But yeah, it was definitely a big goal of mine while I was still in the city. Recently just moved out. So I really wanted to make sure I ran it before I left. And I can definitely say it was one amazing experience. I told myself again, like I would retire after that, but I'm not gonna lie. I get the itch every year, every time in November, once I see it coming on that I want to get back out there. But yeah, it was a really good time.
What was that experience like, just doing a marathon, especially in New York, where, New York is this grand city. The energy is probably just insane. What was it like?
They say that you don't need headphones when you run it, and part of me is like that can't possibly be true. I'm very much addicted to my AirPods that I'm running, and always is getting my groove. I have my playlist set out. I knew exactly where I wanted to be in the race and what time. I had that all mapped out. But they were right. I don't think I listened to music for 90% of that race because it really was that electric. When you get through Brooklyn, honestly, it feels like you're in almost like a concert with everyone shouting, some music playing all the way through Manhattan up to the Bronx. It was definitely electric. I wish my legs felt more of that energy. My head and my heart definitely felt it, but I wish my legs got more of that juice. It was amazing. I honestly can't imagine running a marathon after that because honestly, there's no other course I imagine that's that thick when it comes to having folks cheering you on.
Yeah, New York has always been one of those goals that, I've set for myself in a soft way. Just like, oh yeah, if I, get to the point where I can run a marathon, New York is like the ultimate location for a marathon. So that's amazing that you ran it. It's hard to get in too. So it's even more impressive that you were able to do that.
I got in the back door with the 9+1, for those who might be familiar. But the funny thing about that is I waited until the last possible second to get my last race in. So I actually had to run on New Year's Eve to qualify for the marathon for the next year. So at 11:59, I was not hanging out with friends. I wasn't, at a bar downtown. I was in Central Park running a 10K. So I I definitely paid for it in that way.
Central Park is the best place to run. I'm convinced. Okay. Anyway, that's enough about marathons. Could talk about that all day. You're at ThoughtSpot right now. ThoughtSpot is a AI-powered analytics platform. Let's talk about that. Let's start there. So what are you working on there, and what's exciting, and what's taking up your focus right now?
Yeah, so I would say right now we're certainly focused on really building out a foundational, but really I would say forward-looking security operations and threat detection program. My role today encompasses a lot of spaces beyond just even like TDR. But at least in my mind, that is like one of the core focuses, and really trying to not only level up our detective capability, but also really kind of bolstering our response efforts as well. I think right now today we have a fairly strong and robust team, and I think beyond just looking to elevate tooling capacity and also elevate operational sophistication. I think it's also just trying to build focus and really trying to define what is our goal. Well, what is our win conditions as a program? Something that we're definitely thinking about.
What's it like right now doing that journey? I mean, you made a comment about forward looking. So when you're thinking about building a program right now in 2024, what is forward looking to you, and like what are the foundations that you want in place to feel good about scaling on top of?
Yeah, so I guess like I would contextualize it in a way of like looking at it first, like what are we challenged by like today? I think first thing I really did when I joined ThoughtSpot was think about what are some of the issues that we face today, or what is keeping the program perhaps from taking that next step. And to me, I can think of at least a couple. First foremost, I think is certainly dealing with the dynamic and kind of ephemeral nature of our environment. Much like, lots of software that looks like us, ThoughtSpot has a fairly complicated and diversified infrastructure layer, as well as a fairly complicated application layer as well. So I think first thing, is really making sure that we understand that everyone on the team buys into really being like product experts, right? I'm definitely a big proponent of thinking that in order for you to understand an environment, you really have to understand the nuances of the product that you're trying to defend, understand the user base, understand, what does a normal day look like. And I think data can obviously tell you that to some extent, but I think there's also a layer to that is, I think, human driven. I think it is something you can't really just wake up and model. I think it's something that you do have to you can only really acquire over time. So I think that's certainly something that I'm trying to preach and really kind of drive towards. Beyond that too, it's really just trying to address really kind of our velocity and throughput. We definitely do process a great deal of alerts and a great deal of, kind of underlying ops. And I think just trying to get a handle around that and make sure that we're doing the right things and we're also focusing on the right things. And kind of tied to that is kind of really just efficacy. I think about it, and I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. So I think about it as like, the Eye of Sauron really dropped the ball there at the end of Return of the King. He should have been looking directly at the doorway into Mount Doom the entire time. Everything else was fairly irrelevant, right? So you think about what is your crown jewels or where are the most important places for you to be focusing on. I think it's very easy for you to start looking at perhaps the wrong thing or something else is flashing in a different part of your ecosystem or a different part of your environment, but never forgetting or never losing focus on what are the most important things that you're trying to do and the most important things you're trying to protect.
So let's go a little bit deeper on that one. How do you think about codifying those playbooks and how do you help the team prioritize on what's most important?
Yeah, so really just systemic. I think we definitely draw some inspiration from things like Sigma or trying to adopt frameworks that are going to be hopefully more forward-looking in the sense of trying to adopt principles like detections as code, or also trying to really integrate playbooking or even runbooking more directly into how we respond. And I think we really want to cook some things up with AI as well. But I think it's really kind of looking at your environment systemically and saying that these are the areas of our environment, whether they be specific assets, services, even user bases that we view as being the most critical, and really moving outwards from there. I think all the harsh reality, I think, is often said in security world, is that all security really starts with good asset management. And I think that is a hard truth, and one that I think I'm really trying to champion here. And I think the way I see it is that if we have 10 to 15 really solid playbooks, 10 to 15 really solid run books on how to address certain detections that either we've written ourselves or that we view as being really mission critical to really protecting ThoughtSpot and those assets that are business critical, then I think we've done a good job at least to set the basics. So it's really kind of where we're starting and working outwards from there.
So you take a look at the environment, you're saying, okay, what do we have to protect? What is important to the business? What is the infrastructure that business effectively runs on? What do we have today in terms of alerts and ops, and how good are those alerts? And then thinking about really just honing all of it into a few sets of playbooks, both on what you're detecting and how you're responding to it. I guess the question I have is, what are you looking at to gauge the effectiveness of the playbook? Like, are you looking at really simple things or just the typical SOC metrics like MTTR, MTTD, things like that? Or is it even more specific than that? You're just like, no, I just care about this single metric. Or how do you think about gauging the success there?
It's a little bit of both. So I think the nice thing about working at a data analytics company is that we do have a lot of data-minded folks that work here, both within our own security org, but also across the business as well. So I think looking at the fundamentals, mean time detection, mean time recovery, I think is certainly something that we measure and that we evaluate. But going beyond that, I think it's also looking at more higher order descriptive statistics. And so thinking about, alert or detection frequency, also in terms of like categorization, location of, let's say, where a detection is coming from. So what we're able to do with that is basically be able to build a model of saying that these are maybe the most noisy parts of our ecosystem, or maybe the most annoying apps beyond that as well. So let's say talking about IT infrastructure, areas, things like Snowflake or even 1Password, right? Other types of corporate apps that we view as being fairly important to us that maybe we've even written custom detections for. But then we can ask ourselves, like, did we write a good detection here? Right? This is going off maybe, 15 times a day. Perhaps we need to do some more tuning. But then how do you do that tuning? That is always, of course, the next question. So to me, I think that's something that I think is really important, though, is being able to at least have that kind of deeper view too of how is your detection world really operating in, let's say, a given day, a given week, or given month, and zooming out and being able to actually start seeing trends. And I think that can really give you two things. One, it can show you what's really noisy, but two, it can show you what's quiet. And I think what's quiet too is also like really insightful, because I think that could, I'm not saying that you need to go hunting for alerts. I'm not necessarily saying that we need more blinking lights that go off the night. But if perhaps there are areas of your infrastructure, your ecosystem, that is not really giving you a whole lot of signal, then that could also be a flag to say, like, hey, maybe we need to reevaluate not only the quality of what we already have in operation today, but is there things that we're simply missing altogether?
And that starts with understanding the environment and the playbook really well too.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. What does your feedback look like? So to determine something is good or bad, you need some logical determination of that. So how do you do it?
I would say it's largely, at least right now, ad hoc and very much based off those descriptive statistics. So, right now, let's say on a monthly basis, we'll get together and we'll take a look at the quality, what we kind of call maybe the health of our detections. We also work with a stock partner, so that helps out in terms of some of the logistics of that. But for at least the things that we write ourselves, things that we're the most focused on, I think it's really about making sure that the output of our investigations, or let's say even our hunts, what do those look like, and being able to actually have insight into whether or not those resulted in tangible either next steps or tangible action items. I think that's really, I think, what I've seen as being the biggest indicator of the health of, let's say, a detection. And it's not to say necessarily that a detection is bad if it doesn't result in you actually taking action, because if anything, that means that you're certainly not necessarily losing in that sense. But to me, I definitely like to make sure that we're tabulating that and being able to visualize that, both just in the short term, but also in the long term, and that helps really inform then how well you're doing at both creating and then also monitoring.
If you get a little bit more atomic, how are people labeling alerts? Like, I assume it's a combination of automation and manual, but can you talk a little bit about that? Because obviously the data going into that report is super important. So
Yeah, so the nice thing there is that a lot of that is at least automated today, both through kind of our existing tooling and also through some custom things we built. So it's through a combination of where is the log source from. So I think kind of it's the first way that we slice and look at it. Second way would also be the tactic itself, or at least like what the detection itself maps to, especially from a MITRE standpoint. And then third too is some custom business pieces that we've built ourselves. So it could be areas of our product, areas of our infrastructure that are either kind of walled gardens that we've defined, or that are specific subcomponents that we kind of can all tangibly point to and know that this component relates to either certain underlying functionality or other subsurfaces. So when you at least are able to slice it up in that way, and you can even do that in cross sections, or you can do it just horizontally, you're able to get a better picture of where are detections actually firing, and where are alerts actually being the most prevalent. And also too, it gives you a visualization of where do you even have detections. Because also too, I think it's easy to, let's say, roll into a SIEM or roll into something that might be a bit out of the box and say, cool, I now have a stable of 10,000 detections up and running, but where exactly are they targeted, right? You might wake up and realize that, oh, wow, 7,000 of them are pointed at, my Windows endpoints, but guess what? We have 11 Windows endpoints in our fleet. Maybe that's not very relevant to us. So I think that's a good way to kind of get a sense of what is your real surface area you're covering and how well you're covering it.
And that it goes back to really good playbook management too, because the playbook's the start point, right? There's been a lot of funny posts on LinkedIn and Twitter and things like that about MITRE attack bingo. And there's a lot of people in industry who are like pragmatists who are always like, yeah, I'm just going to ignore like 5 of these columns and do nothing. And I think this is where the playbook comes into play, where you're saying, okay, well, I only care about finding this vector of attack, whether it's like my data warehouse or my endpoint or whatever it is, and then sort of stepping through how someone could potentially exploit that and then sort of shutting everything else out. I saw something pretty funny. I think someone from MITRE made a comment saying like, hey, the attack framework was never meant to be a 100% fill it in bingo. Like you guys kind of messed it up. That was pretty funny.
Yeah, I definitely I think agree with that conceptually. I think it's very much a question of like what is the most important thing for you and your environment, and also then what out of, let's say, MITRE are you the most concerned with? And I think there's at least a very clear top 3, top 5, and then everything else I think kind of becomes, I don't want to say noise, but certainly becomes, I think, maybe second and third order priority. But I think broadly speaking, though, I think if you are especially a team that has limited resource and capacity, if you have only a certain amount of time and a certain amount of cycles you'll dedicate to, I think if you're looking for things like persistence or lateral movement, these are the things that certainly come to mind as being probably things you want to spend more time focusing on. Things like data exfil, right? These are probably the cornerstones of what you'd want to know is happening first, and then everything else kind of becomes second, third order beyond that. So I think that definitely resonates, at least with me as well.
So ThoughtSpot's an AI company. How are you applying Gen AI in security?
Yeah, so I think today we're thinking about it maybe in 2 key ways. So first is really in incident response automation. So I think maybe less so on the generative side, but at least on trying to incorporate bot like, or at least AI features within like instant response bots. So I would say a lot of what we do today, at least historically, has been fairly manual when it comes to either building the strappings of what the IR engine is itself. So let's say we trigger cert, there are certainly a lot of things that infers or that then implies. So I think really trying to automate as much of that as possible, whether that be things like either run booking itself, it could be things like simply spinning up assets that might be needed for response. It could be also something even as simple as generating a Slack channel that have the right people in it to make sure that you're ready to go from kind of like moment zero. It's little things like that that can not only increase velocity, but also just take away a lot of the administrative burden. I think just running an incident, which especially if you've ran a lot, you realize there's often a lot of it. And as any good engineer, right, if you can automate out aspects of your job that you don't like, that's always a win condition. So I think that's certainly a big part of it. The next two, I think, is kind of like more on the actual response side, is thinking more about how can AI technologies help with either reviewing or parsing, let's say, log data, or even being able to recommend based off of either a model you built yourself or even something that might be open source. What are some other next steps that you should take based off of what you're seeing, right? Effectively kind of like an AI companion for real-time response efforts. So it's something right now that we're playing around with, both in terms of kind of building our own and using some things that are open source. That's kind of also an area where I see there being a lot of potential, because I do also think that as of right now, the promise of Gen AI in security, I think, is still maybe in its early days, but I certainly am a buyer of the concept though in the future, because I definitely think that humans, generally speaking, are really good at, I think, putting signals together to paint a picture. And I think that the biggest challenge of that, though, is often getting all that information together in the first place. So I think being able to decrease the time it takes to actually gather that information to be able to kind of at least get you to 90 fast, so the human can go the last 10. So I think oftentimes that's the most important part, and that's also the hardest part.
Are you in the camp of centralization of data, or in the camp of like data is dispersed and it's going to be dispersed forever?
It's a tough question, because I can definitely see logic behind at least like both approaches. I think generally speaking, I think if I had to pick one, I think I fall into the centralization camp, mostly just because I think of the general utility of it. However, I think as we're increasing both the scope and nature of what, I think data engineering, broadly speaking, as like a discipline, I would say, happens within an organization, and then the different user bases that are behind it. I do think that we will certainly see maybe a divergence in the future, where you'll have more niche data laking, more niche kind of data repositories that could be used for a broader class of users within an organization. But at least today, I know, especially from my lens, it's certainly very nice having all your security information all within one spot. At least, especially for a team our size, it doesn't necessarily make sense for us to really be splitting things up into any real need slices today. But in the world of the future, especially as we start thinking about how we could leverage some of that data to create things like LLMs, or to be able to start, I think, running more advanced things on top of it, I think that will organically find its way into the data architecture of the future.
So in using models for response, I think the companion makes a lot of sense. I think automating the scaffolding, like things that are like fairly straightforward. I think you made a comment about using Gen AI with detection. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So at least like on the detection side, I would say like we're really just looking at this experimentally. I think both in terms of trying to figure out, can we use Gen AI to get like high fidelity detections that we can actually put into production? I would say today, at least from the testing we've done, I don't know if I'm totally sold yet. I think a lot of it winds up being very samey. What I mean by that is like very kind of like out of the box, kind of like your top 10, so to speak. Think when that you're rolling out your let's say you're onboarding, AWS logs or Okta logs, right? There's, kind of a default set of about 15 to 20 things that you want to be looking for out of the box on there. So it feels as if like right out there, that's very much what we're seeing. However, I think in the future, and this is where I think both in terms of maybe things that might be coming off the shelf in the future, but also as open source projects get getting more nuanced, perhaps that will change. But I think I'm definitely optimistic for where I think AI's role can be in actually the creation of detections, especially that's pointed towards your environment. Because ultimately context is king in my mind. I think the template style detection mechanisms that exist, they're good. Honestly, like I'll say that I think, especially if you're a small shop, you're just getting up off the ground, having the ability to say, I can consume, I mentioned it before, those 7,000 rules out of the box. That's not necessarily bad, but it's like kind of a level one, right? You start there. But I think in order to get to really like level 2, level 3, you have to really understand your own environment. And then for an AI mechanism to help you, it also has to understand your environment. So I think we're a little further away from that, at least right now, or at least I know what ThoughtSpot is, but I'm certainly keen on trying to figure out how we can incorporate that in the future.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic. I think that as the models get more powerful, or as the mechanisms for determining what model is best for what use case, like we're gonna see a lot of advancements there, but we're certainly in a hype cycle. And there's certainly overblown value that you can get from an LLM or just a foundation model from the start. So I think just realizing that, it really is going to come down to super thoughtful models, prompting, all of these things kind of put together in an interesting way. And the context, like you're saying, is so important. Context on what's important to the organization. What does this type of log mean? What does this signal mean? What's our mindset for writing rules as well? Like there's so much to really like build the context in. And the ironic thing is sometimes if you give it too much context, it doesn't perform well. It's like you tell it too much and then it goes off the rails. So we're still learning how to really interact with models too. So it's great that you're investing in it now, though. I think that's really important.
Yeah, no, for sure. And even something as simple as like understanding variable names or simply understanding asset names is something where I just see like, LLMs just not necessarily being successful quite yet. My S3 bucket name, super top secret information could actually not be very all that important, whereas something that we all know as humans might actually be. That to me is like another example where I don't see it yet today, but yeah, like you said, I'm definitely bullish for the future.
So with every show, we love ending on 3 pieces of advice. So something that you said to me before we started hitting record was that you're really focused on doing things that are just like foundational. So for people who are just starting their program, what are 3 pieces of advice that you can give them and making sure that that foundation is strong?
I start by saying, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think there's a tendency to try to make things perfect, or to try to say that, when you're scoping a project or you're scoping an effort, saying that, well, it really needs to be comprehensive, or it really needs to be, all encompassing when it comes to us like achieving an end. And while I don't necessarily disagree with that, I think, we talked about asset management being very important here. I think that's something that often is overlooked in that regard, but don't let that be what stops you from at least starting, right? Or at least being able to say that we made progress. And then I would say kind of like attached to that is, I think the way I see a lot of what we do is if you can say you're better today than you were yesterday, I think that is a very wonderful thing. So whether that be writing a singular detection from yesterday to today, or being able to ingest a new log stream that you thought was really important, or simply being able to say like we performed, even if it's ad hoc, an effective hunt for something that we know is out in the wild that we just saw that could impact our business, right? I think these are things that, while maybe not always systemic, or at least you're building towards having like a more mature program that has that in a more systemic way, I think being able to at least start and say that we did that, I think is really important. And I would say lastly is, make sure that you keep your focus. I think generally speaking, right, there's so much that we could be doing in our discipline, whether it be, large, small, in between size projects. And it's not so much to say that there's a right thing always for you to be focusing on, but once you do choose that thing to focus on, make sure you're staying the course. I think it's very easy to wind up, moving into the grass, or moving off the path, but, stay on it. Remember your why, and remember why it is that you said that this was something that we really wanted to accomplish. And if you do those things, I think that incrementally over time, your program's going to get better. And, really honestly, it compounds, right? It's compounding interest. So to me, I think those are some of the foundational things, either, conceptually you can do, but also in a more tactical way that will certainly lead to success.
That was great. Very inspiring. Thank you, Al. I appreciate you coming on the show today and dropping some knowledge. And are you guys hiring right now? Do you guys have anything to plug?
Not necessarily anything to plug, but if you're looking for a data analytics tool that you can just speak to in a very casual way that can give you delightful insights, you should give ThoughtSpot a look.
Use code detection at scale. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And the last thing I'll plug is we've been doing a lot of writing on the show. So Detection Scale is a podcast. It's also a newsletter on Substack. So you can find that jacknaglieri.substack.com or just search Detection at Scale and you can find it there. A lot of times we also link like long form lessons and things that guests say on the show. So who knows? You might end up in a blog post, Al, or maybe we'll write one together. Who knows? There's a lot of great content on there. It's been super fun. Some collaborations with folks in the show too. So check that out. Thank you again, Al. It was great talking with you, and catch you all on the next episode.